Let's look ahead to the next generation of the Boise Basque community through current cultural cultivation and outreach like nowhere else in the world.
AI just uncovered something extraordinary in Europe, and it could reshape what we think we know about the Basque civilization. Some of the findings suggest that aspects of their origin challenge what we believed was possible. The mystery becomes even more unsettling because Europe suddenly has no explanation about this recently discovered fact. A people almost alone, it turns out the Basque people are more, and their land holds deeper than we previously knew. Join us in this video as we uncover the details of what AI just uncovered about the Basques. The Basque unique DNA formations, why Europe cannot explain. Today, both historical and scientific research agree on one point. The Basques have lived in relative isolation in their homeland for millennia. But this raises a more fascinating question. How have they endured? Nearly every other tribe and nation has risen and fallen, been absorbed or mixed into larger populations. Yet the Basques, almost alone in Europe, have retained their territory, identity, and language. A new study, Genetic Origins, Singularity, and Heterogeneity of Basques, published in Current Biology, suggests that Euskara, their unique language, may hold the key to this remarkable continuity. Wading into what the authors call a lively debate on Basque population history, they analyze the interplay between genetics, geography, language, and the internal divisions of dialects and provinces. This work is the latest in a line of investigations stretching back to 1945, when researchers first discovered that a high percentage of Basques carried the rare rhesus-negative blood type. Over the decades, further studies have repeatedly confirmed that the Basque population is genetically distinctive. Yet, much like the classical sources, modern studies have often conflicted. Some early research suggested Basques were no more unique than other Europeans. Others found genetic differences between Spanish and French Basques, while still others found none. The problem? Many of these studies were limited: partial populations, outdated techniques, and reliance on uniparental genomes or classical genetic markers. In this new study, researchers collected 190 genetic samples across both the French and Spanish Basque regions. They deliberately included people from different provinces, speaking different dialects and languages, to capture the true diversity of the population. The results are finally providing a clearer picture of how the Basques survived genetically, linguistically, and culturally, maintaining a unique identity while the rest of Europe changed around them. Their endurance is no accident. It is the product of geography, language, culture, and centuries of careful preservation. A story now being revealed through the combined lens of history and modern science. The study went deeper than ever before. Researchers sequenced Basque genomes across 600,000 genetic markers, making it the most detailed survey of Basque DNA to date. By comparing these genomes with neighboring European populations, they were able to construct a high-resolution picture of Basque genetics, and the results were striking. Basques are genetically unique, clearly distinct from other European groups. They are the least similar to North African populations. Surprisingly, their closest match outside the region is Sardinia. But that doesn't necessarily mean the Basques and Sardinians are directly related. Instead, it may reflect a shared pattern. In isolated insular populations, inbreeding can produce similar genetic markers over generations. The researchers also studied the Peri-Basques, populations living on the edges of the Basque territory. These groups show a mix of Basque and other Western European ancestry. The findings reveal a clear pattern. Core Basques share haplotypes almost exclusively within the Franco-Cantabrian region. Peri-Basques share haplotypes both internally and with neighboring non-Franco-Cantabrian Spanish and French populations. Peri-Basques acted as a genetic buffer, connecting the Basques with surrounding populations without disrupting the core Basque genetic continuity. The data suggest two significant points of gene flow between the Franco-Cantabrian Basques and outside populations during the medieval to Renaissance period. A small transfer of DNA and a larger, more substantial mixing. These events, dated roughly between the 11th and 16th centuries, temporarily introduced new diversity without permanently disrupting the Basque genetic identity. What has become of the Basques today? Where are they found these days? Keep watching to find out. Basque today. There isn't an independent Basque state today. However, in Spain, there is an autonomous region known as the Basque Country. This arrangement didn't happen by accident. It grew out of history and reflects the strong desire for self-government among the Basque people. Navarre, meanwhile, there isn't an independent Basque state today. However, in Spain, there is an autonomous rearates under its own separate autonomy statute. This special status was shaped during Spain's transition to democracy and is known as the amejoramiento, essentially an upgrade of the limited autonomy it had under the dictatorship. Navarre's current framework draws on its past as an independent kingdom and preserves elements of its traditional legal system, often referred to as its charters. Basque was once the original and dominant language of Navarre, up until the late 18th century. Today, it has survived mainly through family transmission, especially in northern Navarre, and to a lesser extent, in some central areas. In Navarrese law, these areas are officially classified as either Basque-speaking or mixed. Identity in Navarre is anything but simple. Political loyalties, language, and cultural belonging often overlap and sometimes clash. While Navarre is politically separate from the Basque autonomous community, some Basque nationalists believe it should eventually be integrated into it. On the French side of the border, the situation is different again. The French Basque country does not exist as an official political unit. Instead, it is part of the French department of Pyrénées-Atlantiques, whose administrative center is in Béarn. That said, support for creating a separate Basque department in France has been growing. In recent years, nearly 64% of mayors in the region have backed the idea, though so far, those efforts have not succeeded. At different points in history, both Spain and France have tried to suppress the Basque language and culture, though in different ways and to different degrees. France, built around a strong nation-state model, has long promoted cultural uniformity. Minority identities, including the Basque one, were often expected to blend fully into French national culture. Regional languages were discouraged, and public life revolved almost entirely around French. Spain's relationship with the Basques has been more uneven. For much of its history, Spain allowed varying levels of linguistic, cultural, and even political autonomy. But that changed dramatically under the dictatorship of Francisco Franco. Because many Basque nationalists had opposed him during the Spanish Civil War, his regime cracked down harshly. Public use of the Basque language was restricted. Cultural expression was reduced to folklore and confined largely to the Catholic Church. Open political nationalism was suppressed. Today, the picture looks very different in Spain. The southern Basque country enjoys broad cultural and political autonomy. Basque is widely taught, and most schools within the Basque education system use it as the main language of instruction. The language is visible, institutionalized, and actively promoted. Across the border in France, however, the situation is more fragile. The northern Basque country has no official political status. Basque is not formally recognized by the French state, and public education is conducted almost entirely in French. Without institutional support or autonomy, the language faces constant pressure. Navarre occupies a middle ground, and a complicated one. At one point, Basque was officially classified as an endangered language there, particularly after policies introduced by the conservative Navarrese People's Union government limited its public use. Language policy in Navarre remains politically sensitive and deeply tied to questions of identity. Despite these challenges, Basque has traveled far beyond its homeland. In today's world, the Basques live in a modern, highly industrialized part of Europe. Because of that, many of the obvious cultural differences that once set them apart have naturally softened. Daily life looks increasingly similar to life elsewhere on the continent, and yet something deeper remains untouched. A strong sense of identity, as a people, even as a nation, still runs deep. Who are the Basque people, and what has shaped the sudden interest in them? Keep watching to find out. The Basque people. Thousands of miles away, another mystery has endured, not in stone, but in blood and language. From the Spanish and French valleys of the Western Pyrenees to the Atlantic coast along the Bay of Biscay, the Basque people have lived for thousands of years in a fertile and diverse region of Europe. Through centuries of shifting empires, wars, and migrations, they remained. The Basques are historically isolated. Their language, Euskara, is not Indo-European. It doesn't resemble Spanish, French, or any other surrounding tongue. It stands alone, a linguistic outlier in Europe. They have preserved not only their language but their identity, their traditions, their sense of place. Today, the region known as Euskadi, or the Basque Country, or País Vasco, is celebrated for its cuisine, its wines made from ancient grape varieties like Tempranillo, its fishing villages, and its picturesque cities. Long before modern borders existed, the Franco-Cantabrian region, stretching across parts of what are now northern Spain and southwestern France, was something remarkable. During the last glacial maximum, when much of Europe was locked in ice, this region was an oasis, one of the most densely populated glacial refuges on the continent. Life endured here, plants, animals, and humans. But this land is dense in more than flora and fauna. It is dense in history. From prehistoric times to the present, the Basque Country has been the stage for pivotal human moments. Archaeologists have uncovered Neolithic dolmens, burial sites, and some of Europe's oldest cave art. Among the most famous are the Paleolithic paintings in the caves of Lascaux, vivid depictions of megafauna that once roamed Ice Age Europe. They remind us that humans here were not just surviving. They were observing, creating, remembering. The earliest evidence of modern humans in the northern Iberian Peninsula dates to around 40,000 BCE stone tools. Pottery, carefully shaped geometric microliths, small, hafted blades, trace the movement of Homo sapiens from what is now France into Spain. But they were not alone. Neanderthal populations were firmly established in southern Iberia, especially south of the Ebro River. And here's where the story turns strange. For thousands of years, between 6,000 and 8,000 years, there is no evidence of modern humans south of the Ebro River. Not until roughly 34,000 and 32,000 BCE. The river appears to have acted as a natural boundary. On one side, Homo sapiens, on the other, Homo neanderthalensis. Imagine that world. A broad river separates your people from another kind of human, similar yet different, close enough to recognize, distant enough to remain apart. In the memory of your ancestors, that boundary would not just be geographic, it would be mythic, and perhaps, in some way, it still echoes in the identity of the land we now call Euskal Herria, a place where survival, separation, and continuity shaped a people unlike any other in Europe. For as long as anyone could remember, there had always been the other. Two kinds of humans, two territories, a boundary that held for thousands of years. What does that do to a people? What kind of territorial instinct does it carve into the mind of your ancestors? Over time, waves of early humans moved through the region, arriving, settling, claiming it. The land remained densely populated generation after generation. We don't know everything about these early societies, but we know enough to see patterns. Archaeologists often name them after their tools, the technologies that defined them. There were the Mousterians, known for their distinctive Neanderthal stone industries. Then the Aurignacians arrived with new techniques and expanded across Europe. Other cultures appear to have originated locally. The Solitrians, the Azilians, each added something new, not just to Iberia, but beyond it. And then came the Magdalenian culture, emerging around 17,000 years ago. Nomadic, expansive. Their influence stretched across nearly all of Europe. Agriculture arrived relatively late in the Basque region, around 8,000 BCE. For thousands of years before that, people lived as hunter-gatherers. The earliest animals found in burials weren't livestock. They were dogs, companions. Later excavations reveal oxen, pigs, sheep, and goats, signs of gradual change, a shift toward farming, toward permanence. And what makes them a really interesting people? Why did the Basque area become an object for archaeology? Keep watching to find out. 1,000-old genetic originality. Across the landscape, hundreds of dolmens and megalithic structures still stand. Many crown hilltops and ridgelines watch the valleys below. Some are massive burial chambers. Some appear religious. Others may have served as shelters, storage sites, or territorial markers, silent boundaries between tribes. They suggest something powerful, a deep connection to land, memory, and belonging. In 2004, a genetic study published through Oxford Academic examined European genetic diversity using multiple markers, autosomal, mitochondrial, and Y chromosome data. To understand Europe's ancient population history, researchers needed comparison groups that had remained relatively isolated. They concluded that the Basques could serve as a modern genetic stand-in for Neolithic populations, alongside a few other isolated groups from North Africa, Sardinia, and the Near East. In other words, the Basques preserve something ancient, not untouched, not frozen in time, but continuous. While much of Europe experienced repeated waves of migration and admixture, the Basque population retained genetic patterns that echo back thousands of years. And maybe that continuity traces all the way back to a world divided by a river, to a time when the other lived just beyond the horizon. And identity meant survival. In 2013, a mitochondrial DNA study published in PLOS One examined female genetic lineages in the Franco-Cantabrian region. What they found was striking. Roughly 35% of those maternal lineages were pre-Neolithic, meaning they existed before farming ever reached the region. That suggests something powerful. The people living there today carry visible genetic continuity from Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who survived the last glacial maximum in this refuge zone. In simple terms, some of the maternal bloodlines in the region stretch back to Ice Age survivors. Then, in 2015, another major study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, analyzed 8 human skeletons discovered in El Portalón Cave, part of the Atapuerca archaeological complex in northern Spain. These individuals were Neolithic farmers who lived between 3,500 and 1,500 BCE. But genetically, they weren't purely incoming agricultural migrants. Their DNA showed a mix, early farming ancestry blended with local Stone Age hunter-gatherers. Here's where it gets controversial. When researchers compared that ancient DNA to modern European populations, the closest match wasn't just any group. It was the Basques. And suddenly, the narrative became complicated. For years, the dominant view suggested that Basque culture, and especially the Basque language, was a relic of pre-agricultural Europe, a linguistic remainder from a time before Indo-European languages spread across the continent. But if modern Basques closely resemble early Iberian farmers, that challenges the idea that they remained genetically unchanged from purely Mesolithic roots. So what does this mean? It opens several possibilities. The first is that the timing of Indo-European expansion may need rethinking. Depending on whether the Anatolian hypothesis about early agricultural spread or the steppe hypothesis about later Bronze Age migration is correct, Indo-European languages may have entered Western Europe earlier or later than assumed. The second is that there may have been more than one wave of Indo-European migration. Some scholars suggest a second major influx linked to the Yamnaya and Corded War cultures during the Bronze Age. And the last possibility is that if the Basques descend in part from these early Iberian farmers, their language might not be entirely isolated in origin. It could share distant connections, perhaps even with ancient populations like those of Sardinia. So, Are the Basques truly untouched survivors of Ice Age Europe? Or are they something more complex, a bridge between hunter-gatherers and early farmers, between isolation and interaction? The more DNA we uncover, the less simple the story becomes. What once looked like permanence now looks like continuity shaped by change. And that may be even more fascinating. Some researchers have wondered whether there's a connection between the Basques and Paleo-Sardinian, the pre-Roman language once spoken in Sardinia. Archaeologists have found Sardinian artifacts in the Basque territory. There are also a few intriguing linguistic similarities. But beyond those clues, the evidence is thin, suggestive, not conclusive. Then came another major study. What new details did the study reveal about the Basque people? Keep watching to find out how the Basques got their identity. In 2017, research published in PLOS Genetics sharpened the debate. The study showed that the steppe migrations, the massive population movements that reshaped much of Europe during the Bronze Age, had far less impact on the Iberian Peninsula than on regions farther north. Portuguese and Basque genetic samples appeared remarkably stable, showing strong continuity from Neolithic times. While Northern Europe experienced heavy genetic turnover, Iberia saw a more limited influx. As the authors noted, in Iberia, a blend of older local languages and incoming Indo-European tongues coexisted well into recorded history. That pattern aligns with what we know about the Bronze Age. Migration happened, but not at the overwhelming scale seen elsewhere in Europe. Historically, the Basque country spans settlements along the western edge of the Pyrenees. Today, it is organized into 7 provinces, 4 on the southern side and 3 on the northern side. At the heart of Basque identity is Euskara. It is not Indo-European. It is not related to Spanish, French, Latin, or any other living language. It stands alone, a true language, isolate. About 30% of Basques, roughly 750,000 people, speak Euskara today. The vast majority live on the Spanish side. Only about 7 are in the French portion. Euskara has 5 main dialect groups. On the French side, Navarrese-Lapurdian and Solitan. On the Spanish side, Upper Navarrese, Biscayan, and Guipuzcoan. Some dialects, especially Solitan, can be difficult for other Basque speakers to understand. Linguists believe these dialects branched from a more unified medieval Basque language, gradually diverging due to geography, politics, and administrative boundaries. Structurally, Euskara is unlike Indo-European languages. Its grammar, sentence structure, and word formation follow very different rules. And yet, it is not untouched. Modern Standard Basque, known as Euskara Batua, contains a substantial number of loanwords from Romance languages. As much as 40 of its vocabulary has Latin or Romance influence. It also uses a modified Latin alphabet, so the language is both ancient and adaptive. Isolated, yet porous. That enduring isolation is what fuels the mystery. How did Euskara survive when so many other pre-Indo-European languages vanished? Is it the last echo of a linguistic landscape that once covered Europe? Or does it have distant relatives, perhaps in places like Sardinia, waiting to be better understood? The deeper scholars look, the more complex the picture becomes. Basque identity is not a fossil frozen in time. It is continuity shaped by survival, adaptation, and just enough isolation to remain unmistakably itself. Most of the grand theories about Basque origins don't hold up well under scrutiny. Some try to connect Euskara to Iberian by comparing scattered fragments of extinct languages like Vasconic, Aquitanian, and Iberian. But the evidence is thin: broken inscriptions, partial reconstructions, educated guesses. Other claims drift even further. There's the popular but unproven belief that the Basques descend from Old Testament patriarchs. Another folk idea links them to Kartvelian-speaking populations in the Caucasus, particularly Georgia. A slightly more serious proposal compares Euskara to the ancient Chechen language, noting structural similarities. These theories sometimes fall under broader Dene-Caucasian models, hypothetical language families that would stretch from the Caucasus all the way to Western Europe. If true, that would suggest Basque ancestors migrated from the Caucasus thousands of years ago. It's an intriguing idea, but intriguing is not the same as proven. So far, only modern genetic research has provided clearer answers, and even those answers complicate the story rather than simplify it. What further truths does genetic research show? Whose influences shaped the Basques as we know them today? Where they get their identity? Basque. The Spanish anthropologist Julio Caro Baroja described ancient Basque territory as divided into two distinct worlds, the mountains and the plains. And ancient Roman writers seem to agree. To the south, along the Ebro River, lay fertile flatlands suitable for growing cereals. In the writings of Titus Livius, this region was referred to as Ager Vasconum, the cultivated land of the Vascones. This was the part the Romans encountered first. It had established settlements, population centers, organized agriculture. But beyond that lay something very different, the Saltus Vasconum. The word saltus evokes forest, pasture, woodland, even wild or rugged terrain. This was a landscape of dense woods, high ridgelines, and mountainous isolation stretching from the Ebro Valley to the Atlantic coast and up into the snowy Pyrenees. The Basques were not confined to one narrow strip of land. Their presence extended from cultivated plains to forested highlands, from riverbanks to mountain summits. It was a geography that encouraged both contact and separation. And into this landscape came waves of migrants, particularly Celtic groups, who entered and settled parts of the Iberian Peninsula over time. Yet despite those migrations, something about the Basque core endured. Languages shifted across Europe, empires rose and fell. But in the forests and mountains of the Saltus, Euskara survived. Over time, waves of migrants reshaped the Iberian Peninsula, including groups Julius Caesar called the Belgae and the ancestors of the Gauls. Many of these newcomers eventually became known as Celt-Iberian tribes. Classical authors described them in rich, sometimes contradictory detail. The earliest surviving records come from Titus Livius. Writing about the Sartorian War of 76 BCE, he describes cities like Caliguras and Nasica and the Roman crossing of the Ebro River to enter the uplands of the Vascones. From there, Roman forces moved into neighboring territories, such as those of the Baroni. The Vascones lived on the western slopes of the Pyrenees and the lowlands along the Bay of Biscay, in areas that now correspond roughly to Aragon, Navarre, and northeastern La Rioja. Their name, Vascon, eventually evolved into the term Basque. But the connection isn't simple. The Basques today are not exclusively descended from the Vascones. There is no direct evidence that the Vascones themselves spoke Euskara or were directly related to modern Basques. The Basque country was never a single tribe. Many major and minor groups coexisted, including Barduli, Caristi, Otrigones, Tarbelli, and Cantabri. To the north of the Vascones lived the Aquitani. Caesar tried to distinguish them clearly from the Celt-Iberian tribes when he said, "All Gaul is divided into three parts. The Belgae inhabit one part, the Aquitani another, and in the third are those who call themselves Celts, and we call Gauls. They differ from each other in language, customs, and laws. The river Garonne separates the Gauls from the Aquitani." The Romans referred to the land of the Aquitani as Novum Populania, the land of 9 tribes, later expanded to 12. Its capital, Elusa, oversaw the region for 4 centuries. Meanwhile, the land of the Vascones was called Wasconia by the Romans, forming one of the historical building blocks of Basque identity. The Greeks, for their part, gave the Atrigani their name. In his geography, Strabo called them Allotrigones, literally strange people. Perhaps it was an early recognition of how distinct and independent the Proto-Basque tribes were. The name Vascones itself is ambiguous. Some interpret it as mountain people or frontier people, while others suggest pointed leaves or the tall ones. Whatever the original meaning, it hints at a people set apart, rugged, resilient, and fiercely autonomous. What did the Basques believe in? What formed their religious evolution? Let's see how the Basque people have survived. Before Christianity, these tribes worshipped their own gods. Among the most notable were Mari, a powerful goddess, and her consort, Sugar. Their pantheon was undoubtedly larger, but few records survive. Basque mythology was rich and vivid. It comprised witches, often priestesses of Mari, Lamiak, river nymphs, Mairu, and Gentile giants, legendary builders of dolmens, imps, and wild bear men, guardians of forests and mountains. These myths reflect a culture deeply connected to the land, its wild places, and its mysterious forces. The Basques' persistence in resisting external rulers offers insight into how they maintained their historic isolation. Even at the height of Visigothic power in the 5th century CE, when the Visigoths claimed Basque territory, they failed to fully subdue the region. Later, the Franks attempted the same. Both powers installed border wardens to at least contain the Basques. They could not conquer them. These border regions became the Duchy of Cantabria in the south and the Duchy of Vasconia in the north. Yet neither remained loyal to the Visigoths or the Franks for long. It took a concerted campaign by Charlemagne, beginning in 768 CE, to forcibly convert the pagan Basques, centuries after most of Europe had already adopted Christianity. Even then, the Umayyad chroniclers of the time described the Basques on the northern frontier of Al-Andalus as pagan magi, still honoring many gods. Charlemagne's success was limited, a testament to the Basques' enduring independence, which would echo through centuries of European history. It was at the pass of Roncesvalles that Roland met his fate, fighting the mountain Basque tribes. According to Einhard, in his Vita Caroli Magni, Charlemagne had been relentlessly engaged in the Saxon Wars. After securing his borders with carefully placed garrisons, he marched into Spain in 778 with as large a force as he could assemble. His army moved through the Pyrenees, receiving the surrender of towns and fortified settlements along the way. On the return to Francia, everything seemed secure, his army intact and victorious. But high in the mountains, the Basques struck. The pass was thick with forest, the perfect terrain for an ambush. The narrow paths forced the Frankish troops into a long, vulnerable line. The Basques, light and agile, had the advantage. Their weapons were easy to maneuver. Their knowledge of the terrain was unmatched. The heavily armed Franks were slow, encumbered, and exposed. In that skirmish, prominent figures fell. Eginhard, overseer of the king's table, Anselm, count of the palace, and Roland, lord of the Breton March, along with many others. Yet vengeance was impossible. The Basques melted into the mountains, leaving no trace of their retreat. Countless outsiders, Romans, Visigoths, Franks, and later invaders have tried to understand the Basque people and their lands. And yet, the Basques remain elusive. For millennia, conquerors failed to fully subdue them. Even when they were not free, they preserved their language and culture. They resisted assimilation, surviving where others vanished. Now, with the tools of modern history, archaeology, and cutting-edge science, including DNA and isotope studies, we are beginning to glimpse the depth of this resilience. Basque identity is more than survival. It is continuity, a living testament to a people who have resisted the tides of time, preserving a culture that is as mysterious as it is enduring. The origins of the Basque people are finally coming into sharper focus. What do you think about the information just analyzed by AI about the Basque people? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us. Explore the resilient origins of the Basque people and how they've survived. We hope you found this video both insightful and interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more historical revelations. See you there.